Okay, good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing? Come on, how you doing? It's beautiful out there, right? It's gorgeous. Ugh. I was over snow on December 26th, so any more that we get, I am not a big fan of. But we're here. I woke up this morning, not sure whether we were going to have church or not have church, and I was in communication with another pastor of a church in the area who happens to be my brother, and we were talking, and the question we asked ourselves was this: would they cancel school today? And the answer was no. So guess what? We couldn't cancel church today. So, although some would beg to differ. So we decided not to cancel church. Let me just encourage you, there is a bunch of stuff in our bulletin when we have everyone together. We like to try to encourage you to look at some of those things that are in there, some of the upcoming things. Men in particular, there's a couple of things for you to be looking at. One, we will be finishing up our Wednesday night study this week, and then we will be starting a new one the following week. There's some information in the bulletin about that new study that we'll be doing, so I'd encourage you to do that. And also, we have someone who's going to start doing some not open gym, but a basketball night starting this Thursday for teen guys and men. And so men, teen guys, if you want to get some exercise, you can come and play. I'll try to make it when I can as well. And if you're afraid you may have a heart attack, we do have those little zappers that can zap you back into regular heart rhythm. So we'll make sure those are handy for some of you. But be looking at some of those things. Of course, there's a lot of other things in the calendar that are coming up that we would encourage you to take note of. Next Sunday, being one of them, is the fact that we are going to have communion in the morning worship service. So come prepared, knowing that we're having communion next Sunday, and we'll be taking a benevolence offering at the end of that service. That's important. This morning is the last several weeks we've been doing. We've had celebration Sundays in which we've celebrated the addition of new members into our church, and we ended that last week with a baptism. And that was awesome. And so this week, we shift from doing celebration Sundays to recognize new members to a missions emphasis Sunday, where we emphasize a specific ministry mission, whether it's a missionary that we already support and we teleconference with them, or they're here with us, or a ministry in the area that we have connections with, that we have done some stuff with in the past and continue to do stuff with. This week, or this time that we're doing missions emphasis, is with Restoration Place. And I'm going to let Amy do all the introduction of this and telling you all about this. But we've been introduced to this ministry now for a couple of years, and just a great lady who has a great heart for this ministry. And I'll warn you that she knows teenagers are in here this morning, so she's taking that into consideration. But this ministry is for an issue that is somewhat sensitive. So be aware of that, understand that it is, but also understand that it's a serious thing, and it's really happening, here in Michigan. And she'll get into that, I'm sure. So, Amy, why don't you come? And before she gets going, I'm going to have a word of prayer. And we have some information that's being passed around about some upcoming a banquet, as well as a brochure about the ministry. But let's pray. God, thank you so much for Amy, for her heart for this ministry, and for those that she has put together, the team that she has put together, that all have such a great heartbeat for what they're trying to accomplish and what they hope to be able to do in the lives of young women and women who desperately need this ministry. So God, help us now to catch the same heartbeat. Help us to have the same sensitivity to this great need. And we pray that we would leave here being challenged and being moved to pray and to give not just financially, but also maybe even of our own time and energy. And I ask it in Christ's name, amen. Amy.
Thank you. Well, good morning. Oh, that is so bright. Okay, I'm going to stand off to the side a little bit. You have to excuse me, I've been fighting some sort of virus, so my voice is a little froggy, so yay for microphones. So every time we go into a place, and you guys actually have been amazing over the last couple of years with the jam jars, attending the banquet that we have every year. You guys have been great partners and supporters for Restoration Place, so I really want to thank you for that. And for Andrea, who's part of the team, sort of my right-hand man in a lot of missions that we go on. So, but our goal right now, as well as to build this home, is to make sure that our community is educated, that our kids are educated on what human trafficking is, what it looks like, and how to respond. So we're just going to spend a few minutes going over those, sort of the bare bones of what human trafficking is and what it looks like. So if at any point you are triggered and you need to leave, just please feel free to get up and go. We're not going to get into too much detail with the young ones here, but I wanted to just kind of give you that warning. I am Amy. I'm the director of Restoration Place. And we're going to just dive right into it. So, what is human trafficking? When I first started kind of diving into this, I went to a women's retreat. Anybody been to a women's retreat? Probably a lot of you here, right? No? Really? Okay, well, one. It's sort of like, camp for big girls. So instead of the Elmer's glue and beads, you got classes in couponing. So I had just gone through a really horrible divorce, and I was like, I just needed something. I needed a getaway, so I saw this flyer, and it said, it was a women's getaway retreat. So I got there and didn't realize that the entire emphasis of that weekend was human trafficking. And I had no interest in finding out what human trafficking was, because I thought it was Asia's problem, it was India's problem, it wasn't here in the United States. We don't have slavery anymore, it's not our issue. So I went to divorce care for the 6th time. I got there, and God just wouldn't let it go. So the missionary who was speaking in the main auditorium, and she started talking. I went back, and she started explaining what human trafficking was and what it looked like here in the United States, and it resonated with my life, with what I had already known. And from that weekend on, God just sort of broke everything apart and then started building it back up again. From that moment, I was like, you know what, I've got to do something. I can't let my past just sit there and just look like this. It means something. So I dove into research, what human trafficking was, all the laws surrounding it, federal and local and state laws. And this is what we found out. Federal law, the year 2000 was the first time we ever had a law on the books that mentioned the terms trafficking, human trafficking, labor trafficking, sex trafficking. And it's called the TVPA of 2000. So when I went back and looked at what was happening, this is what it said pretty much, was one element from each of these sections has to be present in order for it to be classified as a human trafficking crime. So it's got to be an act of recruiting, harboring, transporting, providing, obtaining, or selling by the means of force, fraud, or coercion for the purposes of exploitation, involuntary servitude, or debt bondage, forced military or debt bondage. So what that pretty much means is, we're going to start from the back and work our way forward. Debt bondage, what we see oftentimes with this is someone is promised a job, and usually overseas they'll find a job recruiter, which is actually a trafficker, and they'll pay the recruiter money to actually get them a visa. They come here legally. We're not seeing just droves and droves of people coming in crates. We're seeing people coming on legal, temporary visas, student visas, work visas. And what happens is they get here, all their documentation is stripped from them. They don't speak the language, and they're forced to usually work in the labor sector or the commercial sex industry. And then they're told that, you know what, the $1,000 you paid me wasn't enough. You owe me $4,000 more, and you have to work in this industry until that's paid off. That is debt bondage. That also happens here in the United States when it comes to domestic victims, those who are born and raised here. So it's not just with foreign victims. But what happens with that, the debt never goes away. They're being clothed and fed and sheltered, so the debt just keeps getting bigger and bigger, so they are stuck in this industry. Force is exactly what it sounds like. It's somebody being held against their will or kidnapped. Do you guys know about the percentage of what kidnapping looks like when it comes to human trafficking? About how many people are kidnapped, percentage-wise? All right, give me a guess. 15%. Thank you, sir. So actually, that's a lot lower than a lot of other people have actually given me. But that's often what we see in the news is, oh, an attempted kidnapping, they disappeared from here, there, whatever. It's only 3% of what we see in human trafficking in the United States. 62% of what we see is based around grooming or boyfriending in. And what we see happen with that is our young people getting caught up on the internet with people that they don't know. Hello. Getting friend requests from people that you don't know or don't have any friends in common with. And before you know it, the 15-year-old girl or boy that you think you're talking to is actually a 40-year-old man on the other end who's getting ready to sell you to somebody else. What we see, the other 35%, especially here in Genesee County, is family members selling their own. We had a woman, she was sold for the first time at the age of 7. She was traded for a pair of appliances. So money does not necessarily have to exchange hands. So this, the act of is pretty self-explanatory. So federal government says one from each of these sections has to be present for it to be a crime, or any commercial sex act with a person under the age of 18. So if they are 15, 16, 17 years old, and they are working as a stripper, they are being prostituted, they are considered an automatic victim of human trafficking and entitled to all the same resources that any other victim would be entitled to without having to prove any of those things on the top. They don't have to prove it at all. The difference is in the state of Michigan and in 26 other states, our law says if you're 15, 16, 17 years old, we can arrest you, prosecute you as a prostitute, and send you to detention center. And that's most often what happens here and around the country. So you guys have probably heard these terms before. It's modern-day slavery. We have more slaves in the world today than we've ever had in history. Crosses all socioeconomic statuses, races, and cultures. So it doesn't matter if you're black, you're white, you're young, you're old. It doesn't matter what neighborhood you come from. Human trafficking impacts everybody, and everybody is vulnerable to it. It includes global, national, local, and state levels. So what human trafficking isn't. We want to make sure we separate it from other crimes. When we see it in the news, we're like, I don't understand. So what happens is it often includes these things, but it's not exclusively transportation. If I pay somebody $5,000 to get me from Mexico to the United States, I give them $5,000 and I am off and running, I'm good. It's smuggling though. That is not human trafficking. However, if I get here and the trafficker says, you know what, you owe me $6,000 instead of $5,000, and now you owe me money and you have to work here until it's paid off, now we've got debt bondage, now we have human trafficking. So it can include these things. It's not family sex abuse, although it often starts here. More than 90% of those we find in the commercial sex trade have actually been abused at home first. It's not adult labor for low pay. I had a young lady, she was about 18 years old, and she says, well, this lady told me she'd give me $150 if I cleaned her apartment, and I got there and I cleaned it so good, and she gave me $50. I said, well, were you able to leave? Yeah. Did you have to go back? No. That is not human trafficking. Did she learn a lesson? Sure. Get it in writing next time. But we all go through those things. We all go through those lessons. But that is not human trafficking. It's not human trafficking without a trafficker. If I'm out on the streets and I am making quote-unquote dates, I am setting my own hours. I am meeting who I want to. I am spending my own money. I'm out there because I feel like I have to take care of my kid. That is not human trafficking. That is still prostitution. That is still a crime. If there is somebody behind the scenes controlling everything that I do, who I'm with, where I go, and how I spend my money, that is human trafficking. There's approximately 21 to 45 million people enslaved in the world today, and about every 30 seconds someone new is forced, tricked, or coerced into human trafficking. We have about 1 million new victims every year, and when I first started doing this presentation, this number was 50,000. So 5 years ago, this number was 50,000. Because of the expanse of the internet and the increased availability to younger and younger kids, more than 750,000 child predators are on the internet any given second looking to have sex with a child. So scope, we're the fastest growing criminal industry in the world, second largest criminal enterprise. And we often see drugs and human trafficking going hand in hand because most of those who are caught up in human trafficking here in the United States also have a drug addiction issue. And it usually comes after they've been caught up in this cycle. It generates more than $150 billion a year. So that was global. I know that was really fast, but can ask me questions way later. So, United States, we are the top destination for Americans seeking sex with children. It used to be 10, 15 years ago that people would actually have to get on a plane and go to another country to do the sorts of things to children that they can actually just do very easily here today. The sex trade is the most common here in the United States, which is why it's such a big emphasis for those who are educating on human trafficking here. And we're one of the world's largest destinations for sex tourism. What that means is sex tourism is pretty much I left my hometown, my home country, to go to a place and have sex with someone where it's illegal. So that includes children or where it's illegal to have sex to buy sex. It's reported in all 50 states, so even Hawaii and Alaska are not immune. And we as a nation produce and distribute more than half of the world's pornography. So chances are what they're viewing overseas is something that's been produced and distributed right here in the United States. It involves here in the United States more than 1 million men, women, and children. And this number is 18 years old. It came out of the TVPA of 2000. So with the expanse of the internet, my guess is it's going to be much, much higher. But the government says we can logically prove that 300 children per year are traded for sexual purposes. And domestic victims make up about 83%. So those who are born and raised here. These are our kids, these are our grandkids, our nieces and nephews. Problem is, we've got 300,000 that the government says we can logically prove. We've only got about 600 beds nationwide to address the issue. 80% of those are female, 50% of those that we find who are victimized are under the age of 18. Big part of our issue here is we've got an enormous population of vulnerable children. Almost 2 million kids are consistently missing in the United States. A third of these kids are never reported missing. They've either left home and nobody reported it, or they were kicked out at a young age and it wasn't reported. So these are the kids that are consistently gone. There's about 2 million kids actually run away every year. They put on their little backpack and they head down the street. Most of them end up back home. But these are the kids who never end up back home. The average age of a child when forced, tricked, or coerced into sex trafficking is 11 to 13 years old. We're finding this much younger in boys. We're finding it about 9 to 11 years old in boys. The average lifespan from the point of entry is 7 years. We find drug overdose, untreated physical injury, murder, suicide, treatable, transmittable diseases, because traffickers do not take victims to the hospital or the doctor for routine checkups or for emergencies. It just doesn't happen. So 1 in 5 runaways is the likely victim of sex trafficking, and almost 90% of these kids were already in the care of state custody. They were already in the care of social services. 70% of all runaways encounter a child predator within 2 days. Now, again, this number is kind of old, and we see this now because of the internet. A lot of these kids are posting, hey, I'm out the door, and their traffickers in the driveway before they even hit the door. So we're seeing this in a whole lot less time, but traffickers also know exactly what to look for by the way you hold your head, by if you make eye contact, if you give a firm handshake, by the way you walk, by the way you talk, the way you respond to a question. So it's really, really important that we start to incorporate programs that teach kids how to behave confidently even when they don't feel like it, because it creates vulnerabilities in them. Traffickers know within 8 minutes if they've got somebody. 8 minutes. That's it. So forms of sex trafficking here in the United States, and we have all of these things here in Genesee and Flint. Commercial sex act involving child pornography, massage parlors, spas, escort agencies, pimp control prostitution, residential brothels, and online solicitation. Most of what we see is actually now surrounded by online solicitation. Kids are being sold on the internet like pizza. Order them up, be there, do what you do, and then be gone. Residential brothels, we see this a lot when family members are selling their own. Andrea and I, it was a very sad situation, but it was a privilege for us to actually go out. We got a call from a different agency in Lansing about a little girl that was hiding in a house across the street from where she had been trafficked. And we went there, we picked her up, and she just talked all the way back. Her parents had been selling her for the last 4 years by the mother's cell phone. She was pretty much kept in this house. There was no trace that this child even existed. She had been to school 3 years out of her short life, and she was pregnant. But this is a case of a residential brothel, and that's often what we see with these kids. Forms of labor trafficking: restaurants, bars, hotels, agriculture, construction, traveling sales crews, begging, armed services, circus performers, folk dancers, and choir singers. Now, when I first started doing this, those last three, I was like, oh, I'd love to sing forever, sign me up. But that's not quite what this is. Those last three that we see, the circus performers, folk dancers, and choir singers, what happens is in third world countries, very poor villages, traffickers will go in and they'll pick out talents of very young children, and they'll recruit them. They'll tell their parents they get to travel the world, they're going to be educated, they're going to send money back to the family, it's going to be wonderful. And before the end of the day, they've pretty much stolen the children. So depending on where you are geographically, the United States or overseas, what your economy looks like, human trafficking is going to look very different from place to place. Okay, we're just going to skip through some of these. I'm getting this on. All right, so Michigan. Many of you probably heard that we're number 2. We're not. I don't know that we ever have been, actually. There was something that I think the governor said a few years ago in a news release, and we consistently transition between 3rd and 10th place. We are currently number 7th as the worst traffic state in the nation. Victims here are often prosecuted, sent to detention centers, and subject to more abuse. Problem is, here in Michigan, we have over 15,000 kids in the foster care system. We know more than 75% of those have already been sexually abused. We only have 28 beds to address the issue. So why is it happening? Demand, increased globalization. We've got little ones who have access now and can talk to people in India in a matter of seconds. Gender inequalities, ease of internet access, lack of accountability for pimps and johns. So this is a huge one. We're very much on a reactive end of things. We're like, oh, there's a crisis, now we have to fix it, instead of being preventative. There was a study done out of California, and 90% of the Johns actually said that they would not have bought sex if they knew their car was going to be impounded. Easy fix, but it's not been implemented because it costs money up front as a preventative measure. Lack of services for victims once they're rescued. Andrea and I had a heck of a time trying to find a place for this little girl to go. There was just nothing available. When we searched from Grand Rapids to Detroit and Port Huron, everywhere we could possibly find. We did eventually find a place for her, but it was very, very difficult because the resources aren't available. And this is for y'all little ones over here. Now, this number is kind of old. How many of you are actually on Facebook anymore? Seriously. Okay, it's more my generation now. So Snapchat, Instagram, Kik, Tumblr, which ones are you on? None of them? Are you guys on social media at all? Okay, so good job with the homeschooling ones. The sheltered ones. There's a lot of apps out there where you guys can instantly message each other, and some of those, the messages disappear. I don't know if you know this or not, but there are apps out there, and I'm not telling you which ones, but for your parents who need to know, turn off the location services. Turn them off, because traffickers can actually get on there and see where your child is. There's a geo-mapping in location device in every one of those apps that tells them who they're talking to, where they are geographically. 1 in 50 profiles on all of those things are fake. They are predators. So on Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or Kik or whatever the case might be, if they have no friends in common with you, they are not a friend of yours. They have a very common first and last name. Oftentimes I will get, I just got a message. In fact, it wasn't even a friend request. He wasn't a friend of mine, and I had just done a huge seminar, and Sam Smith, not the singer, had sent me a message, and he's like, hey, how you doing? And I was like, oh, who is this? Do I know you? Did we just meet? What's happening? He's like, no, I saw your profile pic, and you're really pretty, and I'd love to meet you for coffee tomorrow in the Detroit area. And I'm like, well, I don't live in the Detroit area for one, and I'm like, I don't know you. So I clicked on his profile, and he lives in Canada. And I said, well, Sam, I said, we live in 2 completely different nations, right? And he says, yeah, but I can just come right over there. And so I knew what this was, and I let it go a little bit, and I asked him what he did for a living. And he was in some marketing, advertising, whatever. And then he asked me what I did for a living, and I told him, and he disappeared. So I was like, well, it's the best way to stay single, ladies, I'm telling you. So I haven't found a man yet who's not afraid of what I do. So it's a very, very common thing, though. Depending on what pages you like, what you put out there on your About section of your social media is the kind of friend requests and the information that you're going to receive. I often receive friend requests from middle-aged men who are walking their dog along the beach. So, it might be a French chef for you or someone who loves to garden. I can't keep anything alive, so that's not me. But you get the idea. If their photo is really, really grainy, if it's low quality, they've downloaded it off Google or somebody else's profile pic and uploaded it to theirs. If they've just created their profile that day and you're their only friend, something's up. Okay, so what do? You block and report. Stay alert of the lifestyle of your friends. Actually, most reports that we get, especially from young people, is because their friend noticed that something was going on. Never send pictures on social media. They never go away. Once it's shared, once it's out there, it is done. It is out there. Set your settings to private or friends only. So what does a trafficker look like? They all wear uniforms now, right? Mm-hmm. Not quite the case. This is what a trafficker really looks like. Me and you. They look just like me and you. Men, women, black, white, young, old, just like me and you. So understand the grooming process. They target a victim. They know what vulnerabilities to pull out in somebody. If they have issues with family issues, if they come from a broken family, if they're feeling down, their self-esteem is not what it should be. They gain the victim's trust by filling a need. So do they need that extra attention? Are they looking for someone who can provide clothing or gifts or something like that? Then they isolate the victim. Okay, friends and family all of a sudden become the enemy. Nobody can love me like they do. So watch out for the isolation part. They begin to sexualize interactions. They start sending photos and videos, sometimes very unassuming at first, and then it gets worse and worse. Same thing when you're in person. So it could just start with a touch on the arm or on the leg, and then it gets more and more advanced as time goes on to desensitize children to these sorts of interactions, making it seem like it's normal. Then they maintain control through threats, blackmail, addiction, and guilt. So blaming the victim. Oh, well, it's your fault. You sent me the first picture, so now you're stuck, and I'm going to send that picture to your family, so send me more, or we need to meet. So common warning signs: they can't speak for themselves, never left alone, they're not in control of their own money. Signs of obvious abuse: if they're confused and can't keep the details straight. We often confuse this with signs, oh my gosh, they must be lying. That's not the case at all. Those who have already been sexually traumatized from a very young age actually store memories differently. Through that fight or flight trigger, through that survival mode, what happens is it gets stored in a place that it comes out all jumbled. So they might start at the end, go to the beginning, go to the middle, and it doesn't quite make sense. If they don't know where they're at, if they don't know what city they're at, they don't know their phone number, what their address is, there's something wrong. If they're 15 years old and they say that they're 18, something's up. If I say I'm 35, we're good. So, warning signs in any setting: if they refer to a much older unrelated man as daddy or boyfriend, or unrelated female as wifey. We find oftentimes in brothels and groups that these are the terms that are frequently exchanged. If there's a restriction of freedom of movement, especially long work hours, little or no pay, harsh working conditions, security measures in the work area, or exhibit extreme fear and anxiety. So security measures in the work area. If you've got someone who just put up 12 security cameras around the outside of their house and the inside of their house, and you don't live in a neighborhood that requires that, something's up. Maybe start asking some questions. These are some of the things. The big thing on this one is the tattoos. A lot of traffickers will actually brand their victims with some sort of name, a barcode, a number, or a symbol to indicate ownership. And what happens after a while, it's called trading up or trading down. They exchange ownership several times. They'll actually have several of these names, numbers, barcodes, or symbols on their body. So what makes a child more vulnerable to sex trafficking? Foster care, lack of social safety net, poverty, gender discrimination, criminal activity, immigration status, history of being abused, substance abuse, LGBTQ community, mental illness, and developmental disabilities. Okay, so this is where it gets interesting. Are you guys good? You want to breathe? I didn't bring the chocolate this time. I usually bring chocolate to my seminars because it's really good therapy for later on after all that information. So when I was 14 years old, the whole reason that retreat resonated with me so much, when I was almost 14 years old, my father was arrested and sent to jail for a year for raping a friend of mine. And over the years, he had targeted single women with children and married them and divorced. And through the years, there were about 11 children who had come in and out of the home. So by the time I was in middle school, they had all just about left. It was just me and my father. So I ended up drinking quite a bit, and I knew just how much to drink to pass out that night and then function in school the next day because it was my safety. School was my safety. So I had, over the years, kind of become the recruiter or the bait for my father, and he was constantly, bring your friends over, bring your friends over. Well, the last one that had come over was the first one and only one that had ever told me what had happened, and I knew what happened to the others. They just didn't tell me. So we had gone bowling the following day after this had happened. He had gotten us drunk and did what he did to her. And I saw it as sort of my way out. So when I went back to school, I went into the counselor's office and I said, are there any school counselors here, educators, who works in a school? No, really? Thank you so much. She knew. So I went into school the following morning and I said, hypothetically speaking, what would happen if? And I laid out the scenario of what had happened the weekend before. He knew enough to take it a little farther. The following 2 weeks, there were detectives outside of our house just watching what was happening. I didn't know it at the time. And then this is where everything fell apart, okay? Instead of CPS, or foster care system, actually coming to the house and making sure I was okay, they called me on the phone one day. I had gotten home from school, and my father left for work because he worked afternoons. And I got a phone call that said, did you know your father was arrested today? I was like, no. So they said, well, give us a name and number of someone we can call to come pick you up. So being that this was a very shame-filled thing for me, I didn't want anybody that I actually loved or loved me to actually come and get me or know what was going on. So I gave them a name and number of people, friends of the family we hadn't seen in years. And I had two choices at that moment. I packed a bag, and I was like, either I'm running or I'm going to stay. But there was no place to run to. The friends I was hanging out with at the time had lives just as messed up as my own. So I stayed and I waited. That foster care family, they ended up becoming my foster care family for the next 2 years. But because my father was such a skilled manipulator, he had convinced everybody throughout the years, and my sister started telling when she was very little, that he started telling people she was crazy. She was delusional, she was making up stories, and how could he possibly do these things? Why? Because we lived in a really good neighborhood, we went to good schools, he made good money. He was the guy you went to if your family needed help with the rent. He taught Sunday school. He went to church every Sunday. So nobody could possibly believe that this man was doing this to all of these children throughout those years, including my foster care family. So when he got arrested the following day, this is where the law enforcement and justice system failed, he was sitting next to me on a couch. Not only did the police officers tell him that I was the one who had told on him, but they let him come to where I was living at the time. So he told me I had ruined his life at that moment, and it was like I shut up for the next 20 years, didn't say a word. And I spent the next 8 years trying to make it up to him because I really felt like I had ruined his life. So by the time I was 22, I finally got the nerve just to write a simple letter, and a friend mailed it, and that's how I got out of that situation. When I was 16, I was so heavily into drugs that my grandmother, and they ended up actually taking me in because my foster care family had kicked me out. So that was my intervention. Someone said Maslow. That was you. Good job, man. Awesome. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Okay, so we're going to move beyond my story for a minute here, so the rest of this makes a little bit of sense. But Maslow said a long time ago that we need these things in order to survive. Starting with the bottom and working our way up, we need physical needs. We need water, food, shelter, and then we need safety. We need physical, emotional, mental safety, and then love and belonging, family, social groups, finally esteem, we're respected and accepted by others, and then self-actualization, the sort of you have arrived thing. You know where you're headed, you know who you are, you kind of like yourself a little bit. My son thinks he's self-actualized, but some days. But this is often what happens with kids and those who are being trafficked. And like I said, more than 90% of those who are trafficked in the United States have gone through years and years and years of early childhood sexual trauma. And this is what happens at the tail end of these. These are the symptoms that we see and the diagnosis that are being given is dissociation, PTSD, anxiety, depression, and Stockholm Syndrome. That Stockholm Syndrome had a really good grip on me, at least for those 8 years. And still some days, and it exists on a spectrum. So it's sort of like, oh, I sort of feel bad for this person, which is why we have so many trouble getting witnesses to actually testify against their trafficker, because they're so very psychologically connected to them. So it goes from I kind of feel bad for him to I will die for this person. I will do whatever it takes to make sure that they are safe. I don't care what they've done. PTSD, when it's a long-term event after event after event, and that survival mode never gets turned off, it's called complex PTSD. And we have several things going on at the same time to address those things, which means the therapy also needs to be different and consist for a long time. Dissociation happens almost every time when it comes to those who have been traumatized at a very young age. And this has been my best friend for a very long time. For years and years and years and years, I said that the last family that we were with, I was like, there were five of us, but there were only 4. I had so sufficiently separated myself from myself, there were 2 of me. And I'm not Sybil, so we can't go there. So, and I often still say we or us instead of me or I, because it's so ingrained in me. I'm in therapy, so it's all good. But dissociation can be someone's best friend. God designed our brain so well that it's an escape route. When you're in a situation that you physically cannot get out of, that fight, flight, or freeze, you can't fight and you can't flight, you can't run and you can't fight back when you're little. And when you freeze and your brain needs to escape from your body. And that's generally what happens, which is also why we see memories very, very fragmented, because dissociation takes over. So my intervention came when my grandparents took me in. And they didn't know it. They had no idea about external therapies or anything like that. But they were very much involved in art and music and all of those expressive therapies, even gardening. That was really, really therapeutic for me, even though none of us knew it. So what happens is when you're stuck in fight, flight, or freeze, your brain actually starts to shrink. The hippocampus and the amygdala actually start to die off, and the prefrontal cortex doesn't develop the way that it should. So what happens with these therapies is those synapses start to grow again. They start to reconnect, and the processing can begin. So they're not just feeling all of these emotions from memories, but now they can connect it to language and logic. So what do you do when you run into somebody who has been abused, who has been part of the trafficking system, whether it's now or in the past? I got to tell you, there are millions and millions and millions of people like me walking around with these issues, and they have no idea why they have these issues. But if they come up to you and they're like, if they tell you this weird story, like Andrea and I were sitting in this car listening to this little girl talk, and we were like, this is just, it's horrible. But the first thing out of your mouth needs to be, I believe you. Don't question about what has happened. Only 2% of those who actually claim to be sexually assaulted, it's false or it's exaggerated. Only 2%. So it takes nothing off of you to say, you know what, I believe you. Listen and validate. So the whole purpose of us creating, what God has brought together is to make sure that these kids actually have that intervention. Not just when they're caught up, off the streets and they're, actually already devastated, but before that happens. So we need to be a preventative measure for those who are already sexually abused and in the foster care system. And it's our goal to make sure that we incorporate all of those expressive therapies and those additional therapies in with our program so that the brain begins to redevelop and build that logical language so they don't end up back on the streets where they started. So this will give you a little snapshot of the land of Restoration Place. And you guys, again, have been involved for the last couple years, and it's been absolutely amazing. We actually paid off 11 acres with the proceeds from our last banquet in Shiawassee County. That's our awesome, it's like a prayer tree, it's our everything tree. So it's our oops, we had a fire tree, it's whatever. It's a great tree, and it's smack dab in the middle of this beautiful 11 acres. Just gives you some idea of the land that God has picked out. There's about 2.5 acres of this beautiful forest area. It's just amazing, and it looks really dense from the outside, but you walk in past the perimeter, and it just opens wide up. It's like a magical little kingdom, and no kidding, the first 3 times we were there, like there were baby deer in there. I was like, okay, I couldn't get any better than this. It was just amazing. So this is the home that we are building. We have an architect who is working for free to help us develop this home, and it is 6,000 square feet, which means we need a lot of money to build 6,000 square feet. We have 6 bedrooms for 12 girls. They will be bunking, but they're really big bedrooms. 3.5 baths. We've got one of those little round things that you see there with the chairs in the circle. That's actually going to be our school room. And then the one on the other side is our dining room. And we're going to have a covered porch, so those little turrets that you see or whatever, so it's a little like a castle. It's very, very cool. So that's kind of, it's going to be a lot prettier than that, but it gives you a basic idea. So it's our goal to make sure that we incorporate animal-assisted therapy, so our first residents will probably be like baby goats. But it is a lot less threatening to create a human, or to create a bond, and to create trust and build a relationship with something that is not human, something that doesn't talk back, something that hasn't proven to disappoint. So animal-assisted therapy is very important. Again, expressive therapies promote expression, imagination, participation. They help victims and survivors actually externalize what has happened in their past, actually get it out of their head, get it out of their heart, and get it out. So that is our goal in a nutshell, to restore hope one life at a time, one precious life at a time. So and you guys have been a part of that. How do you prevent human trafficking from happening? Education, making sure that you all are educated, which now you are, so you're going to be like, oh my goodness, I need to know more, or some of you are probably thinking of people that you already know who are like, I think this might be going on. Knowing the signs. Create programs, mentorship programs. Again, kids need to start knowing how to protect themselves, how to behave confidently, even when you're not, to reduce the amount of vulnerability in children. So, what can you do to help? We have a banquet coming up in April. On April 26th is a Thursday evening at 6:30. We're working on a couple of great speakers to come out. It's at an amazing place. Crystal Gardens Banquet Center is really, really cool. It's free to attend, so what we need right now, we need people to help us on the front end. We need sponsors to help us pay for the banquet ahead of time. It costs about $8,000 to actually put it on. And then we need table hosts. It doesn't cost table hosts a thing to be a table host. You just bring people to your table. You fill a table of 10 or 4, you might make new friends that night. We'll put a table of 6 with you. It's free to attend, so bring people, but make sure they're bringing their checkbook too, because we do take up an offering during the evening. We're going to have a raffle, all sorts of fun stuff that night. So that's all I got for you. I know that was really, really fast and a lot of information. So any questions? Okay. Wow, you're a quiet group. Okay, go outside and wake up. Do some tum tags. All right. Well, that's what we've got. Yes, sir. We do. restorationplace.org is our website. And there should be brochures floating around, and if you don't have one, oh, perfect, okay. We also do 3-hour seminars, and those are, because all medical, mental health, and education professionals who require a license in Michigan are now mandated to take this course. So we hold 3-hour seminars for $49 each, and they get their certificate for that. So, so that's also on there. So that's all I got for you guys. Thank you so much, and thank you for letting me speak so long.
Well, I think you can see the need for this ministry and the many different things that are a part of it. There's so many different bits and pieces of it, and so what I liked about it is there's stuff that adults can be doing that's to help the ministry, but there's things that you as adults and especially as parents should and can be doing with your kids as well to make sure that they're prepared to avoid this sort of stuff. So, begin to train them, as she was saying now, to know how to be confident with certain things. Begin to train them now as to how to use social media appropriately and what's inappropriate and so on and so forth. I think sometimes, it's easy to say no social media, but sooner or later they will get social media, and when they get it, they need to know how to be able to handle it so that someone that's out there that's looking to take advantage of those who are innocent don't get that advantage. And so the more we can train, the more we can prepare our kids in a world that has become sick. And there's no other way to describe it. Our world is a sick place. And the advancement of technology, while great, I think has also harmed us tremendously. And so it just empowers people to do things that they've never been empowered to do before. So keep yourself prepared and keep yourself on guard by looking at these things and thinking about them. But thank you.
Thank you so
for
much.
taking the time.
Thank you.
She will be here all morning. She's going to be here in the morning worship service, just answering a few questions. We'll do a little bit of an interview. But if you have any questions, you can feel free to come up and ask her now. And we'll be back ready to go in about 10 minutes or so. Okay, thank you.
Thank